what your choices have been and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed. The light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now.
Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul Mastery's Sounds of Circles, Heart Sharing in the Round, where we focus on mind, body, spirit, wellness, fitness, and wholeness, and integrating polarity within so we can access and shine the light of unity consciousness. I'm Marie Moeller, and I'm an author, channel, and a host of the Whole Soul Mastery podcast series. And I'm here today with Carol Shwetz and Diane Jackson, who I'm so excited to have together with me in this podcast today. Welcome, Carol, and welcome, Diane.
Welcome, Marie. It's a pleasure to be here.
As always. It's so good to be together. Carol, as some of our listeners might remember, is a veterinarian with a deep intuitive guidance system and has worked with animals obviously for many years. And Diane Jackson is an animal communicator and also an energetic, a healing practitioner. So between the three of us, we bring a lot of insight and experience and knowledge and wisdom. We've grown through all the experiences that we've had. And in the time of the Great Awakening in 2020, the ultimate year of clear soul sight that I spotlight in many of my blogs and these podcasts, we have a love for animals in common between all of us. And I thought we'd start there. And, we never know how spirit's going to guide the conversations. But I thought I might ask each of you, because you do work with animals, to maybe start us off by sharing a story, and I have lots of stories, of an animal or an experience with an animal or a message that you received from an animal that particularly touched your life or that would be relevant for these times, something that you might want to share. And I can start. Would you guys like to start?
You go ahead.
Well, I've been connecting with animals for a long time. And I just recently, in my most recent blog post, shared about my cat Singa, who had journeyed with me twice this lifetime so far. I wonder if he's going to work his magic and return again, because that's what these beings do. They love to, Carol, you were the one saying it really helped me that they love to feel good in their bodies. And I think there is just an amazing grace to the presence that animals bring into our lives. And so I shared some of the story of my journey with Singa, who was Spencer before, and then Singa the last 14 years, and he recently passed away. And he was the one that activated my awareness, not only of past lives, but also of my ability to connect at a deeper level. And I didn't even have a language for that. When he showed up in my life and I was in college the first time as Spencer, I just knew that he felt so familiar. And as we journeyed the next 10 or 11 years together, that round of experience, I knew that we'd lived lifetimes before, and I had never had that language before. So that was my first activation. He activated me into this deeper world of connecting with spirit. And I think that was a main purpose. He came to do that. So fast forward many years, and the story I want to share of just another incredible experience I've had with animals is we have a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel named Leopold, Leo for short. And we found him he came to our family in 2014, because he's only 6. He came to us for my daughter's birthday in 2014, because she had wanted a dog. And about 18 months later, in a dream, his mother, who I met only briefly when we went to the breeders, came into a dream, and she was very clear, and she said, I want to be a part of your family. Right. And I don't dream. I only get messages when I dream. So if I remember things like that, I'm getting a message or I'm having a visit. So anyway, she proceeded to come in 2 more times because I was like, okay, we already have 4 animals. Like, I can't take on another dog. And with all that was going on in my family, you know, those things, they defy rational thinking, right? Some of these nudges that we get, these messages. And so by the 3rd time, I said out loud to my family, okay, I just have to tell you that I'm getting these messages in my dream. She came 3 times and said the same thing 3 times. I want to be part of your family. Right. And my daughter's like, yeah, you know, and so of course, and I said, you know, I at least said, well, I'll reach out to the breeder and I'll let her know that I feel like Cindy, that was her name, that is her name, is supposed to come to live with us. And, you know, I don't know how that would be possible. I don't know if she's already spoken for. And I don't know how that would work, but I at least make contact. And the breeder wrote back, who didn't speak any of this kind of message, signs from the university kind of language, did write back and said, I do believe in signs and she's absolutely meant to come to you. And I think there was another litter or so planned for her, but she said when she's had that litter, she's free to come to your family. I didn't hear a peep out of Cindy for another 12 months or so while she had her litter and all that unfolded. But about 2 weeks before she came to our family, the breeder reached out and said, okay, she'll be ready in about 2 weeks. And so, and within a week of that, Cindy came into my dream one more time, and showed me her sitting in a particular spot on one of our couches. And I was like, okay. So, you know, she had already heard that, yes, she's coming to our family when she first came in, and no need from further communication, like the permission granted, right? And then she showed me herself sitting on our couch in this way. And I tell you, the day we picked her up and she came to our house, she walked straight into the house and went exactly to that spot on the couch. And to this day, that is her spot. And everybody in the family at least knows not to sit there, because if you do, she'll just sit in front of you and kind of stare at you and bore a hole into you until you just move, because it is her spot. And I marvel, she's been one of my greatest teachers, because she's the teacher, I would call it, of the one thing. When she's manifesting anything, it's very focused. It's one thing. I want to come to your family. This is my spot on the couch. I want that cookie that you're eating, right? It's very, very, very succinct and very clear. And, you know, spirit doesn't always communicate in the broader sense, all the messages that we get. It isn't always that clear. But I marvel at how animals communicate with us in the most amazing ways if we're open to receiving. And I'm just curious about, you know, if you guys want to talk about a message or a connection that you've had with an animal before, and also if you feel like, is that a trait of animals that they're very clear, or do you think that's a trait of Cindy that I have, you know, just with her uniquely?
You want to answer that, Carol? Or
I sure can go first to speak to that, Diane. I think it's just beautiful that Cindy has come into your family, because I believe animals have such a sense of family, and that she has chosen to be with your family and with one of her offspring. And their parenting abilities, I think, are really something that is worthwhile for us to consider and to look at and to emulate. And the story I'm going to share this morning that comes to mind is I live on a wetland and some wild spaces here, and the trumpeter swans are moving through this time of the year. They're the middle of October, around our Canadian Thanksgiving. They are the last of the migratory birds to go through, the large migratory birds to go through. The cranes go through, and the ducks and the geese. And the swans go through the latest, because their babies are the latest maturing. And so the parents hold off until the last final moments before they actually begin their journey south. And yesterday, it was just so fascinating as we were on a walk, and to see these, it was the very last of the swans going through, and there was 3 swans flying south. And there was the 2 parents, and their little one was in tow behind them. And you could tell because she's like 2/3 the size, and her little wings were going like faster than her mom's and her dad's. But it was so interesting to listen to the encouragement that was coming. They were, had obviously were delaying their return south. It's cold here, it's sweater weather, and the ice is freezing over. And so they're very much at the tail end and chancing their own survival by remaining, but waiting for their little one to keep up. And to give her the encouragement as they were flying it was really beautiful to see parenting skills in action, and the support that these little ones need to survive and then to thrive. And I think those kind of skills are very valuable as we raise our own children.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, no kidding. I didn't know any of that. That is so awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and these little the little swans are it's very much like the Hans Christian Andersen ugly duckling story, right? And they are pretty. The fledglings they're not very attractive. They're kind of homely.
They're not very attractive.
No, they're not swan-like yet. And as they're in their teenage fledgling, they're kind of gray and they're fluffy and their feathers are, so the young ones really stand out even this time of the year, because they're not mature. It'll be probably till spring till they get their mature feathers. So they really do stand out. And it's really interesting to see the families stick together, like the parent, they're waiting for their little one and they're banking on survival of that little one and their own as they're heading south. So it was beautiful. It was beautiful to see the family moving.
Yeah, no kidding. That's awesome.
Right? Yeah, that's beautiful. I just felt like that, something like families that fly together, rise together, or there's something about in that, right?
Yeah.
In that togetherness, they all rise. It's that strength,
Well, and then just the encouragement, you could tell the 2 in front were just encouraging, the little one behind. It's like, it's like, you can do it, you can do it, right? It was beautiful.
Yeah.
This little conversation going on of encouragement and
yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah, we all need a little infusion of that belief in ourselves. You can do it, you can do it, you can do it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah, Diane, do you have any stories that you'd love to share?
Oh my God, I've got so many. It's hard to distill down to just a couple.
I figured.
I mean, the horses that's always an ongoing lesson there, but the 2 that really come to my mind, the first one, this cat that I had for 19 years, whose name was Minnow because I found him at a car wash when he was just a little baby. And this was probably back in the late 80s when I was really starting to open up to my spiritual path more, and kind of, just not understanding a lot, but reading a lot. I was starting to take seminars in energy work and things like that. And Minnow was just such a master. He would talk to me. He taught me this language that almost sounded very Celtic. And so we would talk in that language, and he would say things to me like he loved to sit in the house and look through the sliding glass door at the squirrels on the deck. And I would say things to him like, "Oh, look at the squirrels." And he'd go, "They're not squirrels, they're Quiwos." And I'm like, okay. That's I don't know, but I was having a serious conversation with him one day because I would say things to him because my husband at that time was very Catholic, and you just don't go there with this metaphysical stuff. And so I would talk to Minnow about all this stuff, and I was saying to him one day, this whole thing about loving God, I mean, I totally believe in God, and I know, I look around me, and it's very obvious that that these beautiful creations come from a higher source. And I said, I guess the part that I'm really not getting though is how am I supposed to love a God that I can't see? I mean, I see the evidence, but I don't really know who God is. And so how do I love that? And he said to me, how much do you love me? And I said, oh my God, it's off the charts. It's infinite. He said, it is the same.
I love how clear, just about the, correcting you about what the squirrels are called, right? Yeah. And just they're so tapped in. They never lose their connection. It's humans that have engaged the separation experience where we've forgotten ourselves as infinitely connected to God. Yes. But they still know. And so, that's one of the most beautiful things about connecting with animals and connecting with nature in general, is that it's still fully connected, and they mirror to us exactly, right? That's the simplicity of that grace, of the depth of, of our love for your cat is the same thing as that essence and love of God in your life that's omnipresent. But I love how clear they are, right? Like he didn't sit there and think about it, right? He didn't think about it for 3 weeks and say, I want to get back to you on that, right? It was right there.
Immediate. Yeah.
Immediate. And they live from that place. And, and just like you said, people like your husband, it's not accessible to everybody.
No.
Right? And were both of you, like maybe Diane first, were you always connected as a kid to animals? Like that's one of the things that I never disconnected from.
Yes, me
in
too.
my life. It's been a steady this whole lifetime. Would you say the same, Carol?
Yeah, for this matter that you wear it so naturally, you think everybody is like that, right? it's kind of a surprise when I think everyone has some level of connection with animals, even people that say they don't. There's always some level of communication going on, and the animals will, in my experience, will often meet the people right where they're at. And so I may have a different kind of conversation or dialogue with an animal, and then Diane will have another different dialogue with the same animal, and
Absolutely.
you will contact or communicate with that animal, and once again there'll be another level of communication that occurs. And I always find that I have found that very interesting, is that the level of dialogue will vary in the relationship and with the interaction.
That is so true. Yes.
Is that your experience as well, Diane?
Yes, and you bring up such a great point there, Carol, because I know for myself, I work very hard to make sure that my personal filters are really not impacting the communication, because particularly for me, and I'm sure for both of you, like if I have a suspicion that there's some animal abuse going on or something like that, that's a real hot button for me, as I'm sure it is for you guys. And so it's that what both of you talk about, and Marie, you talk about a lot, that getting into that neutrality, which is something the horses have taught me. That's the lesson the horses taught me, that you really want to be in that neutral space so that your belief system, the BS, doesn't impact what is coming through from them.
It's so beautiful, and exactly that neutrality. I think it's it's in many ways the key to our lives. It's the key to receiving messages from spirit. It's the key to tapping into your inner GPS system, that neutrality. We can say our heart centers have that neutrality. It's kind of the 0 point inside us. And I think our ability to be in that space helps us tap into the universal language that is streaming through animals and their presence. I'm in awe. So like Cindy, somehow I received in words, I knew what she was saying, but sometimes, so like Singa, my cat, who recently passed, especially when he passed, he just fills the space. When he comes and he visits now, I just feel like this whole presence, fill a room, like fill this room that I'm in. There's something, and one of my other spirit guides, a Native American shamanic being, he also uses very little words. And so when he comes, his presence is so big. I'm in awe. I think awe is what I experience when I feel that. And it comes through that place of neutrality. And of course, to be in a space of neutrality where we're not in the duality game and we don't have all the egoic filters going through, that's the clutter in people's, the static in our fields that prevents this simplistic communication. Singh is not doing anything more when he visits me now than being 100% present. Isn't that amazing? That's the message
That's
now.
amazing. Yeah.
Is that 100% in his presence. And that's the message, right? And that's one of the messages that he comes through with. And yet we see us with our gadgets and our phones and our computers and our emails and our to-do lists and all the things that, we have that distract us in our human everyday lives, that we almost have to make time to cultivate a practice to be able to hear them. And maybe that's something that each of you could speak to, is that I know, Carol, each of you, just like you said, we each hear differently in how we tune into their energy and their messages and what they're really communicating. But I know for me, I was always empathic and very intuitive. And as a child, I was I was born connected, where a lot of people come in and they go through the veil of forgetfulness.
Mhm.
I had maybe a tiny bit, but I feel like I was like 70 to 80% still connected, and maybe
Definitely.
20% with forgetfulness. And and I grew up where my parents, they owned a farm. We didn't live on the farm, but they owned the farm, and we would go there for weekends sometimes, not all the time. But and I've told a little bits and pieces of this story, but I remember just as a kid, is like our weekend activities, I would go, and farmers would rent the farm from my parents, and they plant corn. And there were these, just for, acres and acres and acres of land, rows and rows and rows of corn. I would go disappear in the fields of corn. And I would, and what was amazing, I loved it. I loved disappearing. I think I got a little space for my family, and I liked being out in the neutrality of nature. I loved bathing in the neutrality of nature. And something miraculous, even in that experience, was wherever the corn stalks would come up out of the ground, it would push crystals up out of the ground. So if I would walk the rows of corn, there would be these crystal clear quartz and also smoky quartz that would come up. And so I would spend, I don't know, as a kid, but what certainly felt like hours out there, totally lost in my own world, but totally not lost, like actually tuned in. And that was just one of my experiences. I would collect these crystals and I just bathed in those experiences. And I connected with nature, whether it was corn, whether it was my dog at the time, whether it was trees, whether it was nature. I was always saving some animal that probably didn't want to be saved, right? It was probably perfectly fine, but at that age, on that same farm, we camped out there one night, and my dog sniffed out a rabbit hole, and within about 24 hours had popped about 6 of them out of their little nest, and the mom was nowhere to be found, I'm sure, because at that point, I guess our scent or the dog's scent was all around. I don't know, but we never saw the mom. And so, we stayed there for a few days, and I convinced my parents that we needed to save these rabbits. And so we did. We took like 3 or 4 or 5 of them home, which then just became a fiasco for my parents. We weren't in any way fit to raise these
Oh,
rabbits. And so, but that was my experience. It was always listening and communing and connecting. I felt like they were my family. And in some ways, it's
mhm,
kind of crazy to
yes.
say, but in some ways, I think nature and animals felt more like my family at a deep intuitive level that I couldn't have languaged then than my human family that I was often very different from, or I felt very different. And so they have a way, like it has a way of resetting us and reminding us who we really are. And yet I came in that way, I think is where I started. And then over the years I've learned to cultivate deeper connections and really expanding my intuitive abilities that's always been there, but just really nourishing it consciously. And that's when the channeling began for me. And for you guys, I'm curious, was there a specific practice, or was there a point in time where you made a conscious decision where you said you sensed it too, and you attended a class, or you just started saying, I'm going to tune in differently, or I'm going to tune in deeper? Was there a point in which you gave yourself permission to have more of that? I love your cat, Diane.
And she's decided she wants to participate.
See, they do. They want to be in the podcast roundtables, right? Exactly. And her name is, yeah. And what's her name again?
Sophie.
Sophie. Sophie, well, thank you, Sophie, for joining us. I love it, right? She's listening.
She's an oracle kitty.
Oh.
She does this thing when she comes down when I have sessions with people, and she'll sit in my lap and she'll pretend she's asleep. But if that person says something that she thinks is really important or a great truth, all of a sudden she'll go meow, and then she'll act like she's asleep again.
Wow. It's like the ding of a bell, like, yes.
Yeah. She's affirming something for them, and it's so appropriate. But go ahead,
Wow.
Carol.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Yeah. Well, so yeah, share a little bit about your experience.
Well, I'll share a little bit about rabbits with you if you would like
Yes,
first.
Okay.
This is wild rabbits or wild hares, often, which is very, speaking about parenting, the mother rabbit makes a little nest for her babes, and then she leaves them in there, and she actually only visits them once a day. That's really hard to believe. But there'll be this little nest of rabbits, and so she comes in only once a day to feed them, and the rest of the time they're by themselves in the little nest. And once they start to go out of the nest, it is their mom is always around them, and so it's not uncommon for people to find these baby rabbits and then they remove them from the place and take them to rescue centers and so on and so forth. But actually, if you just leave them there, the mom's around. She's around and
Okay.
watching. So there's a much better chance of them surviving if you just, I know it can be difficult because they seem so tiny and so vulnerable, but their chances of survival are way better by you just leaving them alone. And that's because they're very difficult to raise in domestication because they're on such sympathetic drive. They're just in flight the whole time. And so their success rate is quite poor in rehabilitation facilities or in our care. And but it's not easy to leave them be, but it's if you leave them alone, the mom's around. She's around there.
That's really good, Carol.
Yeah, it's really helpful to know because, of course, I look back on that and I watched my parents very reluctantly, but I was like really out of sorts about it. And I thought that they weren't going to make it. And I was like, how could you, I was like 6 or 7.
Yeah, exactly.
But, the other belief I had at the time, and I think I've carried through since that time, is that my dog scent was, clearly in the nest, and we had already found them and picked them up and put them back in the nest. They were still there the next morning, and I made the assumption with all of our scent on them that the mother wouldn't come back. Do you know anything about that? Like, would a mother wild hare, not return to the nest because there's a human scent that her babies have been touched by that?
That's very possible, but once they're kind of out of the nest and moving around, they may not necessarily need her to come back and nurse, right? They may be
Uh-huh.
old enough to just continue to eat the fine shoots of the grass, and that they may not need nursing. And I'm always surprised how little nursing and care baby rabbits actually get. You would think it's bad parenting, but it's common parenting.
Wow.
Really?
And yeah, their survival rate is very, very high. You just leave them be, kind of like Mother Nature knows what she is doing. And especially once you have the litter mates all together, their chances of survival, because that's how they keep warm in the nest as well, with all of them together. And I guess been in situations where they are taken and they're scared, they're just in sympathetic drive, they're in constant fear. Some animals do well when they're taken from the wild into our care, and some animals really, really struggle, and baby rabbits are one of them that really, really struggle with human intervention.
Wow. I did
They
not
did
know
not
that.
do well in our house. They did not. We put them in a big aquarium. My parents had no plan. It was just trying to support me in what I was feeling, this deep connection with them. And we put them in a big aquarium, but they found a way to get the lid off every night. And so every
Whoa.
morning we'd come down and we'd have to be like, go on a big rabbit search because they were all over our house.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
So it didn't take long. Yeah.
It's a wildlife campaign here. It's like wild hare, leave them there. There's now. Wild hare, leave them there, because the wildlife facilities will get in just, and that's a very common thing, is people will come across like baby crows or small animals, and a lot of times they think they're abandoned, but they're not. Usually so it's a slippery slope when you intervene to take them because you think they're abandoned, because a lot of times they're actually not.
And it's amazing, like you said, I guess even when the rabbits get a little bit older and they're able to go out and eat the grass, that the mother hare, stays close by, and kind of keeps a watchful eye, I guess, until a certain point that she knows that they're good to go. But they teach us if we would listen. And myself included, like I'm speaking to my 6-year-old self now, is to trust nature, and that there is an incredible wisdom to them. And the same thing that we're talking about the hares is the deer. We have plenty of deer here in North Carolina. And when I first moved down here, and there would be a baby deer in our yard, a lot of people, it's the same thing. They call the wildlife rescues, or they think that the baby's been abandoned. But the mom often, and especially in our yard, because there's a frequency here, I think they can sense that it's safe and it's a good place. The moms tend to drop the babies off, and I have a fence that comes to a point, so it's a little bit of a shelter, I guess, for them. It's kind of tucked in and safe. Um, but they drop them off for sort of deer daycare. I mean, they do. They just drop them off. Right? That's the way I see it. My human lens sees it. Oh, it's deer daycare again today. Okay.
Well, it's a nice safe haven for them, like you said, and they have a very good understanding of what's safe for their baby. And same thing with till they're about 2 weeks old, they leave their fawns in these small areas and don't come back for hours and hours and hours to nurse them. Their survival rate is better when that happens. So understanding kind of our definition of care starts to take on a whole different understanding when we see what actually happens in nature.
That is so true, Carol.
That's really, really amazing. And you have to have, I just had a podcast with somebody else, that I'm still to post. She's a writer, but the theme in that conversation was all about listening. And that is something that I think humanity is going to have to a little bit relearn how to be more fully present again. We've gotten so good at managing distraction that I think we're less skilled at this point in that deep listening. But if you really watch nature and you don't rush in to save, and you're more of a witness observer to the perfection that they have through the centuries, right? Through the generations and generations of them, it works. It works.
And true enough, because I find in my experience, and maybe both of you as well, but people often take care of animals like very caring in a way that they would want to be cared for themselves, right? And that project that on the animal, but that's not necessarily what would be in the best interest of that animal. Like, I'm sure, Diane, you see that with people putting clothing on horses and giving
Oh
them
gosh, yes.
treats. And of
Yeah.
course, this is not benign for the horse's health, but people believe that that's what they would like if they were a horse. But that can be very different than the actual matter of things, of what the horse's needs are.
You are so right about that. I just roll my eyes constantly, honestly, at some of the things that, I balk at the word owners because no animal is owned. But these poor horses that are subjected to like all of these boots and this and that and this paraphernalia that the horse is clearly saying, I hate this, don't do this. But their person is just so committed to doing what they think is the best thing for the horse without really considering. It's like, well, did you think about maybe asking the horse what they wanted? And as Carol knows, they try to make it really obvious. I mean, like I have one horse who the owner insists on putting these boots on all four legs, and he spends a great portion of the ride trying to pull them off.
Wow.
I mean, what? I mean, that's all you need to know.
They are communicating all
Animal
the time.
communication at its best.
Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it is amazing. And yet our needs sometimes, obviously, they supersede the obvious, right? We will still continue to project. Humans will continue to project and not listen, in many ways. And so, that brings us back, like, how did you, learn to listen deeper when you were like, oh my gosh, that horse is talking to me, like, or I feel deeper, I'm knowing things without necessarily knowing, or I'm attuned to something that's a bigger language here than probably this animal's person is probably tuned into. When did that start to happen for each of you guys?
Go
Or
ahead,
how did
Carol.
that unfold?
For me, I still think I'm reluctant in some ways, and probably the biggest change came about when I graduated from veterinary medicine and began working with animals on a daily basis. And I found that stand in their presence, and there'd be different information, and it wasn't information that was in the books. They didn't read the books. And so a lot of times I'm like, I don't know where that's come from. Like, what's going on here? But there's like some static and some interference. And over time, my heart started to become attached to and really resonate with the information I was getting. And it was not, the communication of that information was not, I didn't agree with a lot of what the books were saying. A lot of what was my other I began to look different than my colleagues because there was different information coming through. And what I found was, at first, I started to see these patterns. I'd stand beside an animal and it was like opening a book. I would get different information. So it was fresh information. It was new information. It was information I really wouldn't have known. And I just started to notice, then I'd stand beside another animal, and then all of a sudden I would get new information again. I was still very reluctant for many years, though, because I would look different than my colleagues, my treat room protocols and my programs, and it was just very awkward. It didn't agree with the books as well, again. However, when I had the opportunity to I work with dolphins, which is a very unusual venue, I eventually got into a situation where there were some real problems, and I was getting information myself. I was quite tapped out with conventional ways to work with them. I was very well supported with consultants and so on and so forth. And I actually went and in kind of desperation, I reached out to an animal communicator. I said, well, what else can go, And it was really interesting to talk to the animal communicator, because she relayed information that I was getting myself. And I thought, oh, and that was really interesting. It was very novel information. It was very new information. I went, something deeper is going on here. And so I began to give it a lot more weight in my actions and my protocols. And as time went on, the information I started getting became more with the people, not the animals. The animals knew things about their people. And that was really very unsettling for me, because I'm not a therapist. I'm not trained in counseling. And so what I began to do was, I found in the presence of animals, people began to share stories with me. And there would be a lot of emotion that would start to come up. And I really didn't know what to do. I listened, and I just held the space for them. And there seemed to be, the animals would show signs of relief, Diane, the horses, they'd start to yawn and chew, and they start to show these signs of relief. And I was like, there's some kind of a medicinal moment going on here. And with time, I became more comfortable with just being in those spaces. But the really fascinating part was the amount of healing that would occur in those moments was very, very profound. And it would be, sometimes there's a lot of variety out there, and sometimes a hoof abscess would need a hospital bandage and a poultice, or sometimes antibiotics. But there would sometimes those type of injuries and those types of there's anger management issues that would come up, so there was quite a spectrum. And so I found, like, for myself, this information just kept finding me. And you spoke about the neutrality of it, but I also found that the animals, they're very aware of what resources we bring to the table, whether it's chiropractic care, whether it's the antibiotics, whether they know how much we know about nutrition. It was really fascinating how much in my journey, in my profession, all these tools and resources I had gotten access to. But it was really interesting because the animals used them. They used them for their benefit. They knew what I could bring to the table, which was really fascinating. They knew how much I knew about nutrition, and that was what they would communicate to bring to the table as well. And if I needed to learn something more, they were up for that too, because I feel a lot of where I was led to and what I needed to know was sort of directed by the animals as well. So they've been kind of taking the lead as to the pieces of the puzzle that help me to provide, to be a better service to them, I guess I will say.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So much rich information in those connections, and in them being a conduit for that information, and you being a conduit, and tapping into that universal language and that exchange of information, that exchange of connection. And it's there for all of us. It's just, it is, there is a permission of, like, the information was coming into you early on, and that just over time there is, you come to embrace it because you realize it's right every time. I mean, I found, right?
Well, then it's like, that's interesting. You touch on that, because the other thing I have found is that many animal owners are very intuitive, especially about their animals, and are very dedicated to their well-being. and they will get information themselves. And if I listen to them, they will often come up with the same information that the animals are bringing forward, but they're not typical. They've never heard it before. It seems kind of weird and seems kind of way out there. And so they'll tell me, Carol, I get this sense that that the horse needs this, or I go, yeah, absolutely. Like it's really, to me, the owners are connected, and I just kind of say, yeah, that's exactly what the animal is asking for and what they need. And a lot of times I find, I don't know if you find the same thing, Diane, that I don't get these big diagnostic labels like a horse will go, I have this liver lipidosis or whatever, hepatic lipidosis or whatever. They really are present and they go, I need this. This is what I need next, right? And it's very simple. This is what I need.
It's very simple.
Which is really fascinating too. There's not a lot of drama, and they don't necessarily like the big labels. Owners like big labels. A lot of
Yes,
owners
they do.
labels. The animals not so much. They just want to feel well, and then in that moment they need this to go forward, and they know what it is.
That's beautiful.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's powerful. I mean, we all know that they are here as teachers for us, right? Facilitating our awakening into the simplicity that we were always designed with as well. They know the simplicity. We've just learned complexity. And there is this invitation to return to the grace of that kind of simplicity. And yet I'm sure, Carol, I mean, I would just guess, if people are paying you a lot of money to come make the assessment or whatever, they're expecting a diagnosis. And if you were saying, I don't know, something nutritionally, like I think they need more greens, or I don't know, they need something, some kind of supplement or a vitamin, they're thinking, okay, really? Like there's this big problem and you're going to suggest this little thing. But like you said, often, right? Are they almost disappointed that it's the solution and what they need is that simple?
Correct. And that's why I said, I've been reluctant. That's hence the reluctance, right? And yet, when people follow those simple directions, and they all don't, right? For the very reason that, I think my problem's much bigger than, and it's like with nutrition, it's actually less, not more. They're looking for something in their diet that needs simplifying, like less carbs or less sweets or things like that. Less richness is usually a common theme. And some people are often offended by that, and that's too simple for them. And so they don't follow through with the advice. And that's okay with me, because they need to do that for themselves, right? But you're correct. The information is can be incredibly simple, but there's a lot of beauty in the simplicity. And there also gives, a lot of the work of Edgar Cayce was he would go back to very simple principles of life, like, drink hydration and quality food. But within that, the animal seems to have a much broader ability to heal than when we start complicating and throwing more things at them. And the what we offer them can be not benign, like the supplements and things that we think they need. Sometimes they will cause them problems as well. Like they are not just benign. They will cause health complications.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Well, Diane, would you like to share a little bit about just your learning to, allowing it in more, that giving yourself permission, or, how you found your way into actually cultivating that connection?
Well, I, like you, Marie, I was the oldest of 3 children with 2 younger brothers. And I had alcoholic parents, especially my mother. And so I was kind of put into the role of caregiver for my 2 younger brothers. And my animals were my family, as you said. They were always the ones that I went to for love and connection and that sort of thing. And it all felt very natural. I mean, the connection to them. And even with horses, I had never seen a horse when I was a little girl. I'd only seen pictures of them, and I would go crazy to watch the cowboys on TV. I couldn't always remember the names of the cowboys, but I knew the names of all the horses. And so it was, and I started collecting model horses. And so there was just something inside me that was saying, I need to connect with these creatures. And as I got older, I started finding friends who had horses. And because my dad was in the military, we moved around a lot, but I always tried to find friends who had horses. And that is something that I'm a big believer in, and I know you guys would agree, everybody has the ability to communicate with animals. It's just that complexity you were referring to, Marie, that, all of that stuff kind of gets in the way of our feeling that we can actually do that, because I just think it's a very natural thing. And really, if people just play with it and use their imaginations, and start to practice, I mean, it just, and for me, imagination was a big key for me, because as I got older and just felt this love and connection to animals, I didn't really realize that there was this sort of subliminal communication that was going on all the time, but that I had really not tuned into in the way that I did later. And so to just make that a more conscious process, I went to a really good animal communicator who was doing a workshop. And this was like a really pivotal moment for me, because we were doing all these exercises, these intuitive exercises beforehand. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is really fun. And then she said, I'm going to give each of you one of my animals to communicate with. And I just went into freeze mode. Like, the voices in my head started, whatever made you think you could do this? I kind of wanted to get up and run, sort of thing. And fortunately, she like you guys, she was very tuned in. She saw the look on my face, and she came over to me, and she had given me one of her cats to talk to. And she said, I just want you to make up a story about what you think the cat would say. Mm-hmm. And I just said, what, I can make it up? And she said, yeah, just make it up. Just whatever you think the cat would say, just go for it. So I thought, oh, I can do that. So I made up this whole story about the cat. And then when we were going around the room sharing, people were saying what they received from the animals. And she got to me and I said, well, I just made up the story. And she said, well, let's hear it. And she said, well, I want you to know that's exactly what the cat said. And I thought, wait a minute, how can that be? And she said, because when you went into the imagination and pretense mode, the gatekeeper in your left brain went, oh, I want nothing to do with that. And so you opened up the channel. And that was just such a huge message for me. And it's something that I try to teach people to do when they want to communicate with animals. Just play, just use your imagination, because that really opens a lot of doors in such a beautiful way.
I feel everything that you just shared, and it is just like that, is when we play, when we engage that inner child, that imagination, more of our right brains, because in our right brains, I see that, and I've heard some other people talk about, that's where our divine feminine energy largely lives. And in our left brains, we have the masculine energy that's tied more to linear time. So when we're connected into that more intuitive right brain, that more feminine flow of information, we have access to anything we could ever need. Everything can be known to us in that incredible expansive energy. But there is this process of either getting permission, to bypass, from the left brain to say, oh yeah, well, I'm not responsible for that, I'm out, right? Yeah. And the same thing is true that, I've used the metaphor of, in, seeing the ego or the left brain as a little child, and that, you know, there, and that we are the parent when we're accessing our higher self, or we're trying to tap into that intuitive sense inside us. And just like when my kids were little, and it would be around that time where they needed just a reset. So they had nap time every day. And then I would, after nap time, we would have a little snack and we watch about 30 minutes, maybe an hour of one of their favorite shows, right? And I would give them this little snack. And I look at giving the ego that little snack. I say, make it a sippy cup, give it a little bowl of goldfish or whatever, little crackers, right? And let it know that you're gonna, you know, mommy, the bigger me, is gonna go over here and do some things, but you know, you're all set for a little period of time. And I think that's part of appeasing it or bypassing it in some way, giving it something to do so that we can go over here and access the deeper wisdom inside us and that universal language that connects us with everyone and everything. And the animals are tuned in all the time. They don't have that ego brain turned on, right?
And it's like Carol said, and I think she said it so beautifully, it's so simple that, you know, and people are always looking for things to be so much more complicated, and they make it more complicated.
Right. And when you just made up that story, because you're like, okay, well, I can make up a story about that animal, right? And yet that was the truth. When you actually let yourself go and tap into that, it was the truth. And it's right there. It's there for all of us. And that's something that certainly with, you know, the podcast we do on Whole Soul Mastery, that's part of the voices that we bring to conversations like this, is that we all found it. Our listeners can listen to this and say, they all found it so differently, right? And yet it was the same simple universal language and frequency of energy that we're all able to tap into. But the key is the levels of blocks that we might have to accessing, you know, the roadblocks we might set up or that the ego sets up for us. And I've learned that phrase, giving ourselves permission, because it helped give language in some ways to, it's like giving ourselves permission to turn the light switch on, to literally, you know, flip the switch and just allow this bigger vibrational system that's incredible in its ability to connect to the infinite, and that, you know, that consciousness inside us that's in every other living sentient being. And that's where we harmonize, that's where we synergize, and we come together, and they pass these messages to us. So I've been amazed, because I'm not a big dreamer, the times I've gotten messages, and when I've not been listening, when I'm not getting the message, they come into my dreams. They're like, that's it, right? That we're going to get to you when you're the most open, right? And so I've had messages, those messages come in my sleep. And Singa one time, when he was much younger, I can't remember all the details of the dream, but it was another very significant moment where I woke up from a night of sleep, and I knew he was trapped in the garage. Somehow he'd gotten into the garage, no doggy door in that, in the door that goes between our kitchen and our garage. And I went downstairs and I opened up the door, and sure enough, he was there. But he had come into my dream the night before. He was either being attacked by a hawk, or a hawk was attacking him. And hawk is one of my big power animals, right? It's, I'm very connected to Hawk Medicine, who's right over my shoulder here. And so I was trying to help him and the hawk, like, you know, both survive that experience. And I knew he was in great distress. And so, and and he was showing me that was happening in the garage.
Wow.
And so when I went down, there he was, and he was just getting my attention, like just getting
That's wonderful. That's pretty darn amazing. Yeah.
You know, and it's just, and that was even, you know, that was early on when I was just a beginning channel. Like I just turned the faucet on, right? I had just opened and given permission to that allowing. And then over the years, more and more comes, but that's how it goes. And the simplicity of how I receive messages now, it's just, if I get quiet and I'm open, messages come. Whereas in the beginning, I know I was willing, I was communicating, I had crystal support, I had all these things
Mhm.
to help me connect because I assumed it was going to be hard, because
Yeah.
I assumed it was more complicated than it really is. And really, when you just lay back and you surrender and you get into that allowing space and that neutrality, it's all right there. It's all right
That's
there.
so true.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so beautiful. Well, I would ask, as we maybe round out this conversation today, what's um what's one of your favorite ways to connect with nature? Like, where's your favorite place? What do you guys love to do to, to connect? Is it in meditation, or do you physically like to go to the beach or something? Where do you feel like you just really soak it in? That
Carol,
connection.
we go.
For me, it would be walking in nature. There's just such a stillness there that things go quiet, and it's probably my favorite place. And to connect, because it's easy. There's no drama. There's no distractions. For me, it's and I often just walk in nature.
Mm, mm, so beautiful. It is that stillness. Yeah. I think we're going to return to that. I think humanity, we're at the tipping point now. We're at the tipping point of the, amplification of the noise and distraction and all the static in our world. But I think many of us are already finding our way back to really valuing that stillness and that presence and that reflection that nature gives to us about us and all life. And yeah, I could feel that actually, Carol, what all the energy you carry when you go on those walks was in what you just said. I could tap into that. Beautiful. Diane, where's your favorite space?
Well, it differs really kind of. I'm with Carol in that I love nature. I love going out and talking to the minnows in the stream and the lizards and whoever else happens to cross my path on that particular day, and get funny looks as I hug trees and that kind of thing. But I love just standing out on the ground and communing with Mother Earth
Mm.
and sending her love and healing. And I, needless to say, I know we all love being with the animals. I love communing with my crystals. I love meditation. So it's kind of like whatever feels like the right thing for a particular day. That's kind of the direction that I tend to go.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I think maybe feel resonate with what you just said, Diane, is that I have that experience here in North Carolina, and I'm sure where you are, Carol, too. There's so much wildlife. There's like lizards and skinks and snakes. We went to take the trash out a week or two ago, and there was a pretty sizable copperhead snake.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
and my daughter, she's the one who discovered it, came in and said, I think there's something in the driveway. And I went out, and sure enough, it was gorgeous. It was a
They
beautiful,
are beautiful.
beautiful. And what I loved, and Carol, you might add to that, but what I loved is there's a wisdom in that they're not out midday, not active like that. They wait for nature to quiet itself down. I felt even the respect of that. Like, we should have all been tucked in for the night. We're not normally out at that hour. And I think there was just a wisdom and a grace to that. And so she came back in to get me, and I saw it, and then I said, well, let's wait on taking the trash out. But we went back inside for another 10 minutes and came back out to see if it was gone, if it had gone on to the, deeper into the forest next to us. And there was another one, and it was a different snake. And so clearly it was like mating time or something, because they were
Oh
having
yeah.
a visit. And so, but more and more I go into even animals that might be a trigger of fear or something. I actually find myself now going into just awe. Like, nature is miraculous. It's extraordinary. And I felt like a message was given in that experience with the snakes. I always look up the medicine, the animal totem,
Mhm.
or the
Yeah.
power of the animal that I see. And so that's a big way I think I connect. If anything, if a cockroach scuttles
Yeah,
across my floor, I'm like, oh, better look up cockroach messages, right? Because
exactly.
there's all these ways they can, just their presence is a communication of the gifts that they bring. And I think cockroach is about survival. I just remember that, and survival through time, and just their um, endurance, or I don't know what that word is, but their resilience, right? Their
Yes, ma'am.
survivability.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, and I haven't looked up the snake, but I know there's also about the shedding of
Snake
skin and
is usually
transformation.
about transmutation, transformation kind of thing.
Right. And what a
Yeah,
symbol, right? At this time, we're
yeah,
going through the Great Awakening, and I have these two snakes in my yard, and I just marveled at them, and they went on their merry way. And an hour later, we took the trash out. And,
it was
that's
fun.
the same thing as those wild hares, where we started is, really appreciating nature and experiencing nature, and even communicating and communing with that energy. And we don't have to interfere, right? We can just
Yes,
let it be the simple grace, the amazing connection. And I think they sense that, like that snake, snakes didn't get aggressive. There was this sense of like a communication, like, oh, hi, how are you? Right. And most, they don't
huh.
get that experience from many humans, right?
No, they don't.
Right. And even my mom, she lives in Florida, she's moving now, but she'll call, she knows I'm an animal lover, and she said, oh, you'd love this. And some frog got in her house, or some lizard, and you'd think that a boa constrictor was in her house, terrified of these things, because I think we've also, with the pest control companies and all of that, not to say that I'm not judging anybody who uses that, but we're so conditioned to like cast it out or kill it or annihilate it. and
Exactly.
and I've seen over and over, when you just allow it, a lot of the time it's a blessing. It's a blessing, and it's a message. And
Absolutely.
we're learning, we're going to have to come back as we all move through the Great Awakening, and we go through this transformation process that's happening on a global scale, on a collective level, in a big way. I think all the things that we've been taught to be true about many things, we're going to at least have to look at again with different
Yeah,
vision, and look at our behavior, and look at how we've interacted with nature, water, trees, everything, and see if there's a different way to honor more the sacredness of all life in some way. And these
absolutely.
connections, like with us, where we are people who've been blessed and touched by the gifts of animals and their messages, and nature, really, and we're tuned into that. We are voices of that. We're voices of that grace. And I want to thank you guys for joining me so much. I love these roundtables because it's such a rich experience when everybody brings, just the pieces and the
It
parcels
is
of their lives. Yeah,
awesome.
it's awesome. And Diane, can you tell our audience again, where they can find you? Like, what's your website?
My
Or how?
website is animalmessengers.com.
Yeah. And you are you still teaching classes, or not teaching classes lately?
As far as I do coaching to help people understand that they know how to communicate.
It's always helpful to have a guide, right?
Yes,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes,
So
I do that as well.
yeah, you do healing sessions, and
And I do healing sessions with animals, and with most of the healing sessions with animals are remote, of course, because that's usually what they prefer.
yeah.
But I do humans and animals.
Yeah. It's beautiful. That's beautiful. And Carol, do you have a website or a way for people to contact you? They can also contact, if somebody wanted to reach out and had questions, they can also contact you through me at Whole Soul Mastery. But do you have a website?
Not currently right now, Marie, and I'm on a bit of a sabbatical, but if somebody would like to contact me, that would be great. You could share it in your notes at the end of this podcast. That would be great.
That would be great. That would be fantastic. Well, you guys, thank you. Thank you for joining me. I love all the animal energies and presence in this conversation. Carol, I saw your cat pop up. I think I saw a tail at some point.
Yes.
Oh, there's Sophie. Hi, Sophie. She's beautiful. She's beautiful. Her markings. Oh my gosh. I'm so good. There's the tail. There's the tail swishing through. It's wrapping it up. Well, thank you. And thank you to our audience. You can find these podcasts and more at Whole Soul Mastery on YouTube. You can check in with us at wholesoulmastery.com. And you can also find more of our podcasts on my channel, Color the Magic, on YouTube. And until next time, blessings, everyone. Have a great October, and we're almost in November 2020. Hard to believe, but here we go, right? Clear sight is activating in the collective. Blessings, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carol. It's great to meet you.
Been a pleasure meeting you as well. And thank you once again, Marie, for the opportunity to share.
Thank you.
Absolutely.